Welcome back once again to another review for the X-Men franchise. Today we're going to be looking at the fourth movie that they ever made, and arguably one of the worst comic book movies ever made. X-Men Origins was directed by Gavin, and it stars Hugh Jackman once again playing the role of Logan. Now, before we get started, I don't feel as if I'm in the right attire to be doing this review. There's something about this getup that just needs to change to really bring me into this review. Oh yeah, now we're cooking with grease, ladies and gentlemen. This really brings out the Wolverine in me. I honest to God don't know what I'm doing with this right now. It kind of fell right in the moment. So, X-Men Origins Wolverine. It is considered to be one of the worst comic book movies ever made, but let's get the general plot out the way first. So the movie is supposed to be the origin story for Logan, or Wolverine. We are going to see him from a young age, climb the ranks into adulthood, and see how he got the moniker that he does have now. Now, I've mentioned in the last review that let's see how much my love for the character can overshadow how bad this movie can be, and to be honest with you, I hadn't seen X-Men Origins in quite some time actually, and I was kind of looking forward to it because I was like, you know, it's a bad movie from what I remember, but like, how much of it is as bad as I thought it was? And yeah, within the first opening, it doesn't really disappoint how bad this movie is. For starters, we see Logan as a young child that he goes by the name of James, or Jimmy, throughout the entire movie as well. We see him sitting there in his bed. It's the late 1800s, and he sees his brother off in the side kind of complaining that he's always sick, when a man comes in that we presume is his father that's talking to him and saying that he'll get better and everything, when all of a sudden he drops the line where he says, "Your father's drunk again." So he sprints out of the room, and we see the man had gotten shot by a different guy in like the foyer of this house. This then leads to James going by the guy who had just gotten shot, kind of crying over his corpse, and then lunging over and killing this dude in one of the most hilarious screams from a child actor that could have ever been made. We then see him stab this guy, and then we realize that he drops the line where he goes, "He wasn't your father," looks back dramatically, turns back to the guy he just stabbed, and he just goes, "Son," and drops dead. What's really irritating about this scene is the fact that we know that he's not his dad. He said, "Your father is drunk again," when he was sitting with him in bed. So it was just like, why did you need to do this extra step? Like, it was something that caught me this time that I was just like, no, this is really stupid. Like, why did they do this? This then leads to James and now Victor running off into the forest, telling each other that they need to protect each other and that they can't go back home. Thus begins the rest of the movie. Now, I will say, while there are a ton of negatives with this movie, and trust me, we will touch on many of them, there is definitely some positives that came out of this movie. For starters, I really like the opening montage here with the opening credits of this movie. We see Hugh Jackman and Liev Schreiber playing the respective characters of Victor Creed and Logan as they fight through various wars, and it's just really fun to see. Now, some of the action is shot spotty here and there, but for the most part, I like the concept of the idea alone, where you just see them both running through people and just living through and passing through time in each war that they fight in. So that was one of the greater concepts that they had going for them in this movie. We see how they fight against with like muskets, and then you see them fight against like cannon fire and all this other stuff, and it just creates for some great character building a little bit here too, because then we see that Victor Creed gets a little bloodthirsty as time goes on, leading to their eventual compromise as both Hugh Jackman and Liev Schreiber, as these characters get captured and are sentenced to be executed, but because they are mutants and they have a healing factor, they do not die. We get the title card of the movie after the execution. Now, another positive that I found out of this when we got introduced to William Stryker in this movie, he's not as good as Brian Cox, I don't think. I think in X2 he's way better in that movie than he is in this movie, but I did enjoy it for the most part. His performance is relatively fine. I don't hate most of it that's here. here. Once William Stryker meets the two of these guys, he eventually tells them to band together and go with him on this escapade and join this weapon force that he has now created. So this is where you see a bunch of different characters that come into the story. You see Kevin Durand play Fred Dukes in this story. You then eventually see Agent Zero that's here, that's like kind of a weapons specialist with like guns. But the biggest one, the most important one in this movie that everyone talks about to this day, obviously, is Will.i.am. Why is Will.i.am in this movie? Just like, why is he in this movie? Oh yeah, and Ryan Reynolds is here as Deadpool, so whatever. But he's not even Deadpool here yet. He's Wade Wilson here, and while the movies have shit on him quite a bit, and rightfully so, because there's so much wrong with this guy in this movie. It is criminal that they did this with him. I'm so glad that they made these movies later on in life, because holy hell did they fuck this character up 6 ways from Sunday. But actually, when rewatching this and kind of going about it as like my first time experiencing it, let's say, they had some dialogue here that was very reminiscent of what Wade Wilson would be saying in the moment. Like when he talks about the weapon of choice that he uses with the katanas, and he talks to Victor Creed about how, you know, oh, but it's not as intimidating as like bone claws, guns, and he says the line of fingernails of a bag lady, referencing Victor here, which I thought was funny. It just seemed like dialogue that Wade would say in that moment. So there is bad with him, but they did get some elements of the character right in this instance. And then you get just some more fun character moments that I like throughout this series of times. You know, you eventually get Logan, you know, expressing his hatred for flying here. This is like where the first birth of it is, basically. It's not really touched on in the first couple of movies. It's only a hint of it here and there with the line that he'd gave in the first movie where he was like, you call that a landing to Scott. And then, you know, in the second movie when they're flying in the plane, you know, chasing after Magneto and that sort of stuff. So this is kind of where the birth of it is kind of here, and it was just a little fun to see. But then, if you thought that the good was too much here, because apparently this movie thought so, we get our first big action sequence with this group, and it is so horrible. Now, I understand why these characters are here, right? I understand that these are mutants with special abilities that eventually go out and they do the bidding of William Stryker, right? But what's really bad about this movie, and is apparent in this scene, is the wire work. Oh my god, the wire work is so bad in this movie. We see Agent Zero kind of walk up to this like little thing and he goes, yeah, I'm a badass, oh look at me, puts his hands on his head, and then eventually all the gunfire goes off. But he like jumps over this gate and it looks so horrible, and he hits like this quick like pose where he goes, ah, I got those guys. And it was just like, okay, and on top of that, then you see, you know, Victor go on a wall and you just see him go like lunge like this along the wall as he's climbing up. It's just so bad. It looks terrible. Like, I don't know why they thought that this looked any good whatsoever. This especially leads to one of the most memed on things that they had done in this movie with Wade Wilson, outside of what happens at the end of the movie, is his scene with the katanas when he's entering like this office room that they're going into, where he takes the swords and he goes like this constantly, and he somehow blocks all these bullets and stuff. And like some of the shots, like there's the one shot where he cuts the bullet in half, which looked kind of cool, but like, you know, I wrote down in my notes here, I was just like, I don't really know if swords were like that, bro. Like, it's one of those moments where it's just like laughable. We find out throughout this scene, though, that William Stryker is here to grab this rock that this guy has, and he eventually meets a small village that knows more about it, and eventually he gets his answer where it is just came from the sky and it's not really sure what is in it. But after all the wars and everything that they had done together, this is Wolverine's breaking point. He can no longer condone any sort of killing of people, which I guess they're innocent people in the sense they're in the village and all that sort of stuff, but it's like, dude, you've been in wars forever. Like, you decided to join this like weapon force. Like, you kind of knew what was coming with this. So this eventually leads to him leaving the group, and then this jumps 6 years later where Logan is now living with his new wife on the edge of a cliff in Canada. And I've said for years now at this point that as much as I do not like people, this is the ideal place I would live in. In the woods, by the waterfall, just away from people. Let me be alone. Because then we see him also as Lumberjack Logan, which is something that I didn't know I needed in my life, but we see him in like this flannel thing and cutting up some trees and stuff, and I was just like, I don't know, I thought it was kind of funny. But after being isolated for 6 long years in Canada, he is now visited by William Stryker once again, as he is now being told that other members of his old force is being hunted down and killed. And this scene has plenty of Wolverine sass to go around. Enjoy.
18 grand a year?
18.5. Plus, I haven't had to kill anyone in a while.
Starting to miss it.
Right about now, I am. Attaboy.
Your country needs you.
I'm Canadian.
Now, some of the things that they fundamentally get wrong in this movie, too, like, not even just, like, the technical stuff that they do, but it's a lot of the dialogue that they write, too. I already praised some parts of what they did with Wade Wilson, with Ryan Reynolds. Like, they got some of that right, but it's not all, you know, great. They have some line delivery here where it's just kind of like, you know, the guy shoots the gun out of his mouth and he's like still chewing on cheap cigars, and eventually they're riding around in a car, Logan and his wife, and he does the line where he goes, "I'm the best there is at what I do, and what I do isn't very nice." It just feels very shoehorned in. It doesn't feel very natural at all whatsoever. Same thing when he says bub later on in the story too. It just feels so forced, and it's just kind of like, it feels like they wanted to hit like Wolverine's greatest hits, and it just didn't come across well whatsoever in like natural conversations. This then leads to kind of like basically where he gets his name in a weird way. His wife goes on and blabbers on about some story about, you know, this dude and the moon, and how they were like tricked into staying on Earth, but then they can never go back to the moon, and it's called the Wolverine. And it's one of those things where I watched it and I was like, this isn't cool. Like, who thought that this was like, yes, in order to get his really cool nickname Wolverine, we have to be like, it has to come from some short story from his wife about how it's like, oh, they can never be together again because some magic shit. It's like, no, that's not good at all. But Wolverine is thrust back into all this action and mayhem because he later on finds out that his wife has died from Victor. This then leads to a bar fight that I wrote in my notes, oh, this bar fight has some cool moments. And then as it kind of progressed, I went, never mind. But I will say, Liev Schreiber is also doing a really good job in this movie, too, as Victor Creed. He kind of carries this, like, weird swagger about him. Like, I guess it kind of helps that you wear, like, a really long black trench coat. I think that's the key to this performance, honestly. But regardless, I think both of them, their dynamic between each other as the brothers, like, I thought it's played up really well. And again, Victor's kind of, like, swagger that he has going on with it, and his demeanor, and just his voice is great, too. He actually voices a lot of the NFL Hard Knocks series. If you are not familiar with that, they actually did last year with the Jets. They apparently, he's like a big Jets fan, so they like had him go on the show, and I was like, oh, cool, it's that guy from X-Men Origins. But I thought some of the fight was gonna be cool, and like how parts of it is like okay. They do a lot of this like slow-mo, fast, like 300 style editing, and it just doesn't translate really well after a while. There's a really funny moment where the logs are kind of kicked off this stand, so they land on top of Logan, but instead of like, there's no vibration or anything, like the logs fall, they hit him, and then they just stop. Like everything just like the gravity like pushes them together so hard that it's just, no, we sit here, we do not move at all. But because Logan is defeated in this first interaction with Victor, he is now thrust into William Stryker's hands once again, as he is now put into the Weapon X. Now, the idea of doing the Weapon X program in full length sounds like a really cool idea and a really cool moment for people to be shared on the big screen. However, when they do it in this movie, it is very underwhelming and poorly put together. Another really bad line read in this is also where William Stryker goes, "I can give you the tools to defeat him." I'm just like, that's such a bad... I can't with this movie. So when you see Logan kind of sitting in this bath of water when they're doing the Weapon X program, where basically his whole skeleton is being fused with adamantium, that was what William Stryker was looking for with this rock this whole time. It was just a bunch of metal that is seemingly indestructible that he was looking for, and now he has a purpose to use it, and it is for Logan. Now the editing in this is poor. It's so bad. It cuts between him looking at his wife and him looking at Victor, and like all the past stuff that he has in between this, while he's getting, you know, needles drilled into his face, and it's just like so poorly done. It's just like you'd have to watch it to really see it. Like, it's not cohesive at all whatsoever, And the only good part about this is honestly the slow-mo shot where he comes out of the tub after he's lived through the experiment and overhears William Stryker saying to erase his memory. That's the one shot in this that was actually pretty decent. However, it's ruined by the rest of the scene. Because, again, there's a cool moment here where he gets shot in the face by Agent Zero, and you see the healing factor kind of gloss over and cover the metal skeleton that he has again. But when he jumps out of the tub and he fights off against these guys and escapes the facility, it's like there's no blood, there's no like anger and fear and like torture by this guy. Because if you remember in X2, when they showed the flashbacks of him with the experiments in X2, he was all bloody, he was screaming, he was in pain. The Weapon X program is an intense program that basically ruined his life at the end of the day because he was a mutant that was experimented on. In this scene, he just kind of like goes on through, makes a big X through the door as he exits, looks at his hand, and jumps off a cliff so he escapes the facility. And something that was touched on before in other reviews of this movie that I had to really hone in on when I eventually saw this again was the claws just looking as bad as they do. Because we see Logan kind of run into this farm where he's trying to hide from Stryker and all the people. He like looks at his claws and everything, and again, as mentioned before, it's not like in any agony, there's no blood, there's no like pain and stuff. He looks at him and he just kind of like goes ching, 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 and it looks so bad, and it's played off for comedy because he breaks something, and it's so weird. Like, I don't know why they decided to do it this way. We get more bad action here too, because then we see Wolverine fly off with a motorcycle and be chased down by a helicopter, which sparks the infamous meme where he walks away from the helicopter while there's an explosion here. I gotta say, it's just not very well done. Like, the editing, again, is just so quick-paced and choppy, and it's just not coherent, like, at all. It doesn't look cool. Like, there are some parts that I was like, oh, when he cuts the car with his claw and cuts the tires, that part's kind of cool. But then him jumping off the car, being launched in the air because the missile shot at the one car, so now he, like, cuts the wings on the helicopter and, like, somehow makes it crash. Like, that part looks it ruins any cool moment that you could have done in that scene. But I will say, when we do have Logan in the farm talking to the old people, this feels very similar to another scene that'll come up way down the line with Logan. So I just want to plant the little seed here at first because it feels very similar in a way, and it was something that I caught on when watching this. Because he's escaped William Stryker now and he wants to fight Stryker and Victor Creed now, he needs to find an old friend of his, and he goes and he finds Will.i.am. Because that's the guy you want to go into a fight with. There's a really bad boxing match here, too, that they have with Dukes, who is now the Blob in this story. He's like this big, gigantic, fat, blubbery dude that he now has to fight to get some information out of him now. But this all leads to something that I don't hate, but I don't love either, and it's the introduction to Remy LeBeau for the first time, Gambit. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the character and its history that it had with this movie and going forward, there is none as of right now. But during the time, there was this sort of swelling thought, and it almost happened, where Channing Tatum was actually going to play the character of Gambit, and then plans just kind of fell through. Now, I have my hunches that he'll be coming into this Deadpool and Wolverine movie as a cameo for it, but that's just me wishful thinking. But the guy that plays Remy LeBeau in this movie, it's not terrible. I don't hate it. I hate the action that he does, but like him as an actor playing the character wasn't that bad. Until he becomes a total bitch and then gets fucking, clocked on the side of the head and just gets knocked out for a little bit while Logan fights Victor once again. Again, it's a lot of moments in this movie where they do a lot of like, this is interesting. This could work. This might work. It's kind of working. And you just ruined everything that could have possibly been good in this scene. I did like the line in this though where Levi, Schreiber, and Logan are kind of talking, and this is the first time Sabretooth sees Logan with the new metal claws, and he goes, "Ooh, shiny. How do you plan on exactly killing me?" And then Logan's response is, "I'm going to cut your goddamn head off and see if that works." And that sparks the next fight that they have. At least that there was that little bit of a cool moment in there. This is where we get towards the end of the movie where it is just like, if it was bad before, it gets worse here, because you see his wife is not dead. his wife faked it because he was part of Stryker's team all along. Basically, he had said that he needs to keep tabs on people because they're very dangerous and powerful people. Why wouldn't he have somebody there to know what he's doing all the time? So she faked his death, basically slowed her heart rate down to the point where it's almost as if you were actually dead. But then this is also the part that I don't like, because Wolverine has feral senses, so it's like, couldn't he have like smelled something was up or whatever? I don't really know. Like, because she gets like fake blood thrown on her, and I'm just like, would he maybe not have thought that that was fake? I don't know. It's a weird hodgepodge of a mess here. But we also find out during this scene is that Stryker was hunting down mutants throughout the entire film to create the pool. The pool? The Deadpool, of course. So rather than Wade Wilson having the powers of like being regenerative and a skilled assassin, no, he's just really good with katanas. And then Victor was hunting down various people with various powers to put into one mutant, and Logan was a part of this because he needed to be sure that somebody could take the punishment of the Weapon X program like he did. So the ending fight scene with Logan and Deadpool here is started, and jumping off the bat, just look at him. Just look at how bad he looks here. You took the merc with the mouth and you got rid of his mouth, basically. He's shaved on his head and he just looks so weird. He doesn't hold katanas in his hands anymore. Katanas come out of his hand like Wolverine's claws do. And again, like, it's such a bad representation of what Deadpool is. Again, the dialogue with Wade Wilson was okay, but you took the fundamental thing that made him who he was away at the end of the day. Not to mention, they somehow get on top of this like scaffolding sort of thing like you would see at like a nuclear plant and fight on top of there, and I'm like, why are you even up there? This makes no sense. I'll give it that there was a kind of cool shot where they do a callback to what they used to do in the war between Victor and Logan, where they go back to back and they like fight people, you know, with backs to each other to kind of cover each other's asses. And that's kind of cool to see here for a moment. But then it leads to the end of the film where Wolverine gets his claws heated up from the laser beams that shoot out of Deadpool's eyes. Yes, you heard me. The laser beams that shoot out of Deadpool's eyes. He cuts his head off, and that is seemingly the end of Deadpool in this movie. A terrible representation for this character. One of the worst portrayals of a character I had ever seen in a comic book movie. Just thrown to the wayside like that. Just instantly out of here once this fight is done. And then to make matters worse, you get the predictable ending then where he has to lose his memory. So then his wife gets shot, Logan gets shot in the head, and now he is a guy who doesn't know his name, doesn't know his past. He just knows that he's a dude with a dog tag that says, "My name is Wolverine," and Logan at the same time. He runs away and thus concludes the only Origins movie that they had ever made of this caliber. Because you see, if this movie was going to do well, the studios had plans to make more movies like this, where it would have been a spin-off series of a bunch of X-Men movies, where you would have seen like the beginnings of like Cyclops, who was in this movie for God knows what fucking reason. You would have seen like maybe like other characters here and there get their own like origin story, but the movie was so bad that the company just went, nope, we're not doing that again. So in the end, the movie is just a big fucking mess of a movie. Like, the CGI is like terrible, the storyline just is not really narratively sound. Like, it's too many twists and turns that they do, and like, it's the story that I wouldn't have wanted to see out of an X-Men Origins Wolverine movie, because we know what happens in the end. He gets the metal in his body, he loses his memory, and that's what happens. He'll eventually find Charles and the School of Mutants, and then he gets his memory back eventually. But the stuff that they showed at the beginning of the movie, where he was like in the wars and like as a young kid, that's what I would have preferred to see. They did a total character assassination of Deadpool, Ryan Reynolds as Wade Wilson, and it took them from the time they made this movie, which I believe was 2009, all the way until 2016 to eventually correct the ship and have Ryan Reynolds go, no, this is how you make a Deadpool movie. And I'm so glad they listened to him. Yes, indeed, this film does live up to one of the worst comic book movies ever made. I'm going to give X-Men Origins Wolverine 1 star. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully this was more fun to watch than the movie itself, to be honest with you, because I sure did not have a blast at points watching this. On the next film that we're going to be discussing in the X-Men series is going to be X-Men First Class. So we get a big jump in quality between the last two movies that we just saw. Thanks again for watching, guys. Make sure to click all the socials down below where you get my Twitter and you get my TikTok with all my other fun stuff that I post on there. And I will talk to you all next time.